Hi guys, today I want to share every book that I read in anticipation of becoming a mom to basically prepare me for motherhood. I always think it's weird when people don't inform themselves about how to be good parents before they're parents. Obviously, I understand, things get in the way, life gets in the way, but it's like the biggest responsibility that you have in life. So I would think that it would take top priority in terms of making sure you're doing it right. So I really wanted to learn as much about it in advance as possible. And I'll put my library storefront down below if you want to check any of these out. Also, before I get into them, just a reminder, my second novel, A Song at Dead Man's Cove, is coming out June 2nd. It is a gothic horror novel. If you love atmospheric, historical, lush, dark fiction, then this is definitely one you'll want to keep an eye on. And if you sign up for my newsletter at drannayuden.com, you will be the first to find out once it's available. Without further ado, let's get into these parenting books. So I split up these parenting books into a few sections: psychological, health-related, sociological, and more spiritual. You'll see what I mean. So starting with the psychological, the first book that I read, I don't actually have it on me right now. It's The Whole Brain Child. I read this one about a year ago, and it's all about understanding the neuroscience of a child's brain and using that to better deal with their emotions, including and maybe especially temper tantrums. I actually made a video on this book on my psychology channel, but it was from a slightly different angle where I applied it to dealing with emotionally immature adults. It was a really good book. It had some fascinating techniques that I never would have thought of before reading it in terms of dealing with children. It was very concrete with lots of examples, so I would highly recommend that one. The next one is The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read and Your Children Will Be Glad That You Did. This one was written by a psychodynamic therapist, and although I didn't learn too much from it just because it is coming from a lens that I'm already very similar to, I think this is probably the most important parenting book that I've read so far. It is full of gems. It teaches you how to break the cycle of intergenerational trauma by actually listening to your child's feelings and learning from what triggers you as a parent. If I were to recommend any one book out of all the ones I'm going to touch on today, this is the one I would recommend people read. Then there's Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child by John Gottman, who is the, famous relationship researcher. And this is based on his research into the types of parents when it comes to fostering or not fostering emotional intelligence in their children. It's very straightforward. It teaches you what not to do and what to do when dealing with your children's emotions, according to research. I will also have a full video on this book up on my psychology channel. I'm not sure if it's before or after this video posts, but keep an eye out for that if you're curious about it. Then there's Raising Good Humans. This was mainly about using mindfulness techniques as a parent to not get reactive when dealing with a child's emotions when they trigger you. It was a little bit basic for me personally, but if you're not super familiar with mindfulness-based therapies, you might benefit from this one. Now, within the category of psychological parenting books, I think there's a subsection we need to talk about, which is if you come from a family that includes a cycle of intergenerational trauma, or if you have somebody with a cluster B personality in your family, that is definitely something you'll want to process through before becoming a parent yourself. So that's where Stop Walking on Eggshells comes in. This is taking your life back when someone you care about has borderline personality disorder. It's about dealing with a loved one who has borderline personality disorder and kind of balancing compassion with boundaries. There's also The Good Daughter Syndrome, help for empathic daughters of narcissistic, borderline, or difficult mothers trapped in the role of the good daughter. This one is specifically for daughters of challenging, cluster B-ish moms who have spent their lives trying to be perfect and trying to be the good girl. There is The Drama of the Gifted Child, which is also written by a psychodynamic therapist about children who have lived through complex trauma due to parenting. This one I would say is not so much about hands-on techniques to deal with people who have cluster B personalities, but it is quite validating if you were raised in a household that had a lot of complex trauma. The Emotional Syndrome, What to Do When a Parent's Love Rules Your Life. This one is what it sounds like. It's written by the therapist who coined the term emotional incest, and it goes into great depth about what it is and how traumatic it is and how important it is for parents to not do this to their children. I think this is an important read for all future parents to know why they can't treat their children like best friends or like a romantic proxy. So I think regardless of whether you yourself have experienced this phenomenon, if you're about to become a parent, you should read this book. Then there's Adult Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers, Quiet the Critical Voice in Your Head, Heal Self-Doubt, and Live the Life You Deserve, which is, again, what it sounds like. If you have a narcissistic mother, then this is a good one to read before you yourself become a parent. And Mothers Who Can't Love, which is also for women who have a mother wound. So moving on to health-related books about like the process of pregnancy and, once the child is born. My husband read this one. I didn't read it, but he read What to Expect When You're Expecting. He just gave me kind of the cliff notes, which is better for us because I get a little bit of illness anxiety when I read about like the worst case scenario that could happen. So it spares me that anxiety and it better prepares him and kind of brings him in on the experience of pregnancy. That book is intimidatingly thick, but you can read it gradually over the course of the pregnancy, and in that way it's super doable and it's pretty comprehensive. And what he's going to be reading up next about like the developmental stages of having a baby is What to Expect in the First Year. We haven't read that one yet, but that should give us a good sense of what to expect health-wise for the kid. Moving on to sociological books. The Smartest Kids in the World and How They Got That Way. This is the third book I've read by Amanda Ripley this year, which speaks to how much I love her writing, but this was my least favorite of hers, to be honest. I feel a little bit misled. I thought this was going to be a book about how to promote intelligence or education in children, but it was more just a case study into different educational systems based on high schoolers who spent a year abroad. It does have some interesting things to consider school-wise, but it was much more about the educational system than what parents can actually do to foster intelligence in their kids. I did have a few takeaways, which is that school should be challenging and it should be a meritocracy, not based on effort expended. Teachers shouldn't make excuses for children just because they tried hard enough. Children whose parents read to them from a young age tend to perform better at reading later on. And the education system needs to foster critical thinking, not just rote memorization. So that one might be interesting for you if you are interested in education system and cultural differences more broadly. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it for people who are wanting to foster intelligence in their kids. Then there's iGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, and what that means for the rest of us. So this is about Gen Z, or as the author calls them, iGen. Technically, I'm at the very cusp of Gen Z, so not much of this was surprising. I thought this would be a book about ways for parents to foster a healthier relationship with technology in their children. So again, I feel a little bit misled by the title here. It's not just about the role of social media either, but rather specific themes among Gen Z youth, which is probably not going to be altogether relevant for when my child is a teen, because they're going to be a different generation altogether. But if there was one important takeaway that I took from this book, it was the teens today are quite overprotected and coddled in American culture, and it was just a reminder for me that once my child gets to teenage years, I need to encourage independence rather than reinforcing their dependence on me. And I need to encourage them going out into the world and making relationships with peers and romantic partners rather than being so reliant on the family unit. Then there's The Coddling of the American Mind, which I have been raving about. This was the best, most important book that I read in 2024. It's not technically about parenting, but it is about the problems that young adults have these days, particularly once they get to college and particularly in American culture. And it did make me reflect on the importance of not coddling children, the importance of teaching resilience and independence, and how to challenge cognitive distortions in them. So I would recommend this one for expecting parents. And then lastly, let's talk about a couple of spiritual parenting books. The following two are a bit more woo-woo. If you're into nature-based spirituality and pagan history like I am, then it might be up your alley. And if you're not, you're probably going to give me a side eye. We have this great tome, The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. This is a history of goddess worship and fertility cults. It's not technically about motherhood or parenting specifically, but I found it to be really interesting in terms of thinking about how, as an expecting mother, I am in this kind of like mother archetype. And so in the sense, this is a book about, the mother archetype within pagan history. So that was pretty cool to reflect on. And then this next one is a little bit less credible than the last one. And I honestly had moments where I was like, that sounds fake, to be honest. But it was recommended to me by a friend. It's called Womb Awakening, Initiatory Wisdom from the Creatrix of All Life. It was similar to the one I just spoke about. Again, like I said, just a little bit less credible. But it was an interesting way to think about the spirituality of pregnancy, the way it's an embodiment of the divine feminine, and it helped me think about what the process of gestation must be like for my unborn child, which helped me sort of connect with the experience of pregnancy more. Another really thick one. Do what you will with that information. So there we have it. Those are all the books I've read up until this point about parenting. I'm sure once I get to, my child being a toddler and my child being a teen and having a second child, those will be like a whole new batch of books that I'll need to read to prepare me for those different milestones. But yeah, if you have any recommendations of your own, I am always open to those. I always want to learn more about this. So definitely let me know in the comments. Hope you have a nice rest of your week, and I'll see you soon.